Welcome to Powerful Perimenopause, solutions to powerfully inform, educate, and gracefully move you through perimenopause. Today we have Dr. Yvonne Castillo. She is a pain-free movement specialist. I'm saying that again, pain-free movement specialist. And she is here to talk to us today about how to stay active, pain and injury-free beyond 40 without depending on pills, potions, or procedures. Yes, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you so much for putting the summit together. It's helping women through the stage of life is very near and dear to my heart. And I just think it's an incredible time to do it, and season of the year and season of life to just make sure that we are serving these women in the best way possible. So thank you for having me.
You are welcome. I am especially excited for Yvonne to be here because I've been an athlete my whole life. And I have had times when I work through pain for years on end. And I've had times when I wake up completely, which is most of the time, wake up pain-free and feeling great. And I have friends that wake up every morning in pain. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's women here who have that same story. So I am thrilled to have been introduced to Dr. Yvonne, and let's start out.
Yay!
Women become more susceptible to injuries in their 40s because I know there's lots of reasons, but specifically into perimenopause, our hormones are starting to shift. Mm-hmm. And how does that affect our ability to either heal and or sustain injuries more easily?
So possibly. that is such a good question. And one thing I see all the time is like people, they'll come to me and they'll kind of go like, well, why is this happening all of a sudden? Like this came out of the blue. And I'm kind of like, it really didn't. Like you really have to put into perspective, like you have just logged 4 decades of life. And when you look at kind of our arc of what we typically do in that trajectory of between in our 20s and our 30s and in our 40s, it becomes more apparent. And oftentimes what I tell people is, we all have individual bodies, and we all have, I have our little kind of special nuances into there. Like I personally have a leg length discrepancy and I'm on the hypermobile side. If I didn't do things to balance that out, I probably couldn't do a lot of the things that I do. Like I'm an avid runner, I've done half marathons, like I am your outdoors girl. But if I didn't know my body well enough and I did some of the other things, I would probably not be able to do any of those things anymore and be in a different state. But a lot of people aren't really aware of like their personal body. So they start to get these, like I say, it's almost like these little weak links, or there's like an unraveling thread. And there's a story that we tend to find when people finally come to me after they've tried everything. They've tried the chiro, they tried the acupuncturist, and they're just like, I feel like I'm just falling apart. Like, I don't understand. Like I was, I get some really, really awesome women that it just like, they're phenomenal. And they're just like, I could hike. I was like, I could work, I could do all these things. And they're like, getting out of the bed is hard. Like, I can't even, pick up my kids anymore. And like, I don't understand, like my body is not matching kind of like my spirit and my soul anymore. And it's really hard. And I think a lot of times when they go get help, people will just give them the blanket of like, oh, it's your age. And not dive deeper and not see people as a whole person. And I definitely think like, yeah, once you start to see the hormonal changes, and it plays a really big role when you're looking at things like how quickly you can recover, dealing with inflammation, also things too, like the physiology changes of your connective tissue. So like your collagen and your ability to be flexible, as well as muscle mass and bone mass as well. So those are all things. So people are getting a little stiffer. You're not recovering as quickly from, simple things that you could do before, where you're like, oh my gosh, I could like walk in the morning, then I can go run, and then I could take the dog out, and then I could go with my husband somewhere else, and then I can do all the cooking and cleaning. You're just like, it's almost like not having as much, I like to say, like reserves in the tank anymore. So that's what we tend to see. And unfortunately, it's like, because I said like that sometimes like our mind and our spirit is, sometimes it's like, wait, my body's not where I want to go anymore. So a lot of times we'll put that pressure on ourselves to kind of keep operating at that level, but we're not necessarily doing the right things to balance that out.
Right.
I mean, I've seen people that have like, they're doing their same program that they were doing when they were, in their 20s. And I was like, that no longer serves you, because now you're working a 9 to 5, you're traveling to work, and you're not doing the things to balance that out. And a lot of people just don't know that that what to do. And then they start to just kind of get those little injuries. And I think the biggest thing is like, a lot of people, they won't listen to those little warning signs. Like, think of it like a check engine light goes on, but they just ignore it. They just ignore it. They just ignore it. And they don't realize those little things is the beginning of something that kind of comes into something else. Or the more common thing is those little things start to create this little compensation and this little compensation. Like I always say, like the body is fortunately and unfortunately all connected.
Right.
And I was like, we're going to use that to our advantage, because you are a whole person. But oftentimes when people get help or they go seek help, it's like, you're just a shoulder injury, you're just a back injury, you're just knee injury. And we're like, when you start to unravel that, you're like, oh, it's actually coming from not where you think it is. Right. And I mean, I think probably it just like brings to mind a client of mine. It was like, old ankle sprains, soccer, and kind of, you could see that, because you can get away with it. That's the tricky thing, is you can get away with it. You can get away with it and recover in your 18,
a long time.
For a long time. But that stiff ankle, or that, that kind of unstable ankle that you're running on, that you're doing all these things, starts to lead to something else, turns into an ACL turns into some arthritis, and then it starts to go into back pain. You throw in, and that's another big thing, you throw in pregnancy. That tends to be something that will really, when we are diving into people's stories, that's a big one. I always tell people, I wish that when you would go into the OB and you're saying, I'm thinking of getting pregnant, they're like, okay, like you're kind of preparing for like an Olympic event, and like really give people the tools to go through that, but then also get back to their life appropriately. I think that's probably one of the bigger ones too, with women specifically. Yeah. You start to see that some things happen during that window of time, and they never really got the help they needed, or never really kind of started at a safer place to build their body back up. You throw in multiple pregnancies, and that's like a whole different story.
Right.
Yeah.
And the possibility that after pregnancy, we do get to build our body back up, mm-hmm. and get like the same opportunities and musculature and shape as we did before. It's possible.
It's totally possible. And this is where I kind of have a little ick with kind of just culturally, where people will put time stamps on people. And then also just how we have a, conception of how people should look. And a lot of people, you don't know if there's a big difference between having a C-section, having multiple kids, or having different things. And I guess I tell people, like, giving yourself the dignity of the journey for yourself, and knowing what is right for you when it comes into physical fitness and keeping active, and not always pigeonholing yourself where you're like, I have to run X amount of miles, and like, this is what it is. And it's like, that may not necessarily serve you. Right. And that's a big thing, is when people can really step in their place of knowing themselves and enjoying being active, and feeling empowered in their body, what that looks like for them, instead of like, I have to go to this boot camp because that's the only way, to lose the weight. I have to, get back to my pre-baby body, or, I have to do all these things within 6 weeks. And it may not necessarily be realistic. It doesn't mean that they can achieve those goals. We just have to find that alignment. And I think there's so much pressure where people are put into boxes, or there's a time stamp on stuff. But when you release yourself from those things, I think that's when people really start to see the possibility of, yes, I can be pain-free. Yes, I can be strong again. Yes, I can be functional. And also know that they're doing these positive things, because I'm of the mind that when I'm 80 and 90, like, you're still going to find me like running on the beach and hiking the mountains. Yeah. And so that's really when I work with women, it's like really diving into like, what do you want your life to look like now, but also what do you want your life to look like later? And that's another thing, is like the whole age thing like drives me bananas, but because I like, age is simply like, it is, you acknowledge it, your body, but it doesn't have to be a limiting factor. Like, I have so many amazing women that are like, I have a lady who, she's fabulous right now. She's up in Washington. And that was her thing. She hikes 11 miles every single day. you know, after a doctor told her, oh, there's nothing can be done for you. That's another thing. Oh, you've got bursitis. Like that's like just like a nail in the coffin. Or you got arthritis. And like, that really doesn't mean anything necessarily. But yeah,
I love to hear all of those words.
Yeah. So it's great. So just know that there's always a possibility, even if you've been told, or even if you've lived with pain for so long, like that's just the way it is. And like, you're just going to have to settle, like literally earmuffs, and just know that it is possible to be pain free, and it is possible to still live your best active life. And you just have to, just kind of have to know where you're at and where your body is, and just acknowledge it, not kind of keep putting yourself in that kind of pigeonhole of where you are.
So Yvonne was telling me about her three-step mobility method.
Yeah.
And this is something that she's been developing over her years of practice. And what she's speaking of, ladies, you've probably not heard of a pain-free movement specialist, nor had I. And I've been in athletics since I was 8 years old at the highest levels possible. So this concept of having pain-free movement available for us for our lives is this is gold that we're about to be delivered. So Yvonne, please jump in with your three-step mobility method and tell us all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like as Susanna said, yeah, I've been, practicing 10 plus years. I also specialized in pre and post-operative care, and especially in sports medicine. So I literally would go into the OR, and I've seen every surgical procedure under the sun. So I literally know the body inside and out. And that really helped me developing this method, because you can really see what the body looks like, and you start to match it up with how people are coming to me. And the stories, I kind of say their body stories, and their stories that they say. And honestly, I think we complicate things so much. And I like to say there's beauty in the basics. And I really, because one of the problems is everybody's probably going to notice, but consistency is so key. And that's the very thing that gets us into these painful problems, can be the very thing that gets us out of it. So like I said, it's like these little marbles in our shoe, this little unraveling thread. Like I said, it's often all these little things that cumulatively lay us out on our back, give us the rotator cuff tear, lead to the frozen shoulder, versus conversely, like I said, the whole body's connected, and I like to use it towards us. If we start to do all these little things that are good, there we find healing. So the three-step mobility method that I have is focused on 3 principles. And how you get pain-free, it's all about balancing your body. And you have to kind of acknowledge, we're a very sedentary lifestyle, and oftentimes where people flip from being very sedentary to being really, really active. And I tell you, have to prepare the body to do an activity, but you also have to kind of think you almost have to prepare the body for not doing activities. It's kind of a weird thinking, but almost like you have to prepare your body from like sitting on your butt all day and zooming it. And the same thing is you have to do things to recover from activities, and then also being sedentary. So you have to balance those things out. So the 3 steps that it's called 3S. It's really easy. So you want to think of soften, stretch, and stabilize. And it's important to kind of go in those orders as well. So when you think of soften, what do I mean? Doing like daily soft tissue kind of work. And so what does that mean? That's how you release tight restriction. You want to think like it's almost like we're in a straight jacket, and you need to kind of like peel those layers away, because you can only be as strong as you have the ability to move. If you just jump into the strengthening, if you're all bound up, you're more inclined to tear a muscle, hurt your joints, be super swollen afterwards. So you need that mobility first. And oftentimes people, what happens is they're short on time, and I'm just going to go jump and go do this. I'm just going to go jump and lift weights. I'm just going to go jump into the boot camp class, instead of really taking the time to kind of prepare yourself to do the movement. So the first step is soften. So what do I mean by soft tissue release? It's very simple, kind of using like tennis balls and lacrosse balls and some simple things that you have in foam rollers, but getting into releasing the muscle tissue and the fascia. And fascia is basically, it's a dense connective tissue that surrounds your muscle joints into there, and it can get really, really tight. Everybody kind of knows what their IT bands are into there. They're often kind of a common culprit of some knee and hip issues into there. But if you do regular work, I know, yeah.
Tell everyone what the IT bands are in our language.
Okay, so your IT band runs from kind of like the side of your hip all the way down, and it attaches into the side of your kneecap. And so if you've ever gotten like the clicking of your knee, if it's ever been really painful, if you're just sitting, or if you go for a run where it literally feels like sometimes like someone's taking like an ice pick into the side of your knee, or like driving a screwdriver in, because it literally is just getting tighter and tighter and compresses it. And oftentimes that's why you'll see sometimes like an little egg size of like a swelling will show up at the side. That's your IT band. And that often gets tight because we are weaker in our hips and weaker in our core. And that just gets, it just gets tight on us. So, so if you're doing things regular to release the tissues that tend to get tight, you can be in better alignment. The joints aren't as compressed. You have better mobility and flexibility, and you can actually be stronger. And oftentimes what we tend to do, we have bigger muscles kind of in the front side of us. So our flexors and our internal rotators that kind of pull us forward. And unfortunately, we tend to work out like a lot of people do bicep work and keep on just working those muscles when we should actually kind of flip it on its head, where we should be strengthening kind of our stablers on the side of us and then our backside body, because they're kind of what sustain us with movements, and they'll actually balance kind of those muscles that tend to be tighter. So that's why it's important to do the soft tissue every single day. Each one of these pieces, honestly, takes you like 5 minutes to go through it. I've kind of boiled it down. I was like, you really only need to probably do like 2 handfuls of exercises, like full body, and it would keep your body totally balanced. And it doesn't have to be complicated. I tell people that exercises aren't super glamorous, but they do the trick, because what the difference is they're specifically targeted. And that's where a lot of the different programs, there's just a little bit of a loss. So there's a gap in through there, because they're generalized movements and you can't really get the feedback of how you're doing from one side of the body to the other. So you can't pick up on those compensations or discrepancies where you're like, okay, well, why am I so tight on this side? And then you're like, oh, well, I'm always on the computer going this way. So that's why I say, like, this is your time to check in with your body. And it almost serves as a litmus test, because you'll see like people, when they start doing it, they're like, oh my gosh, like I am so tender on this side, it's so painful. But as they do it more and more, they're like, oh, it's getting better. Should I even do it anymore? I'm like, yes, 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 it's still doing something, but you're getting the feedback that your body is releasing itself. But like I said, it serves as a litmus test, because you'll start to connect the dots. Like, say you're traveling. I know we're not doing a lot of traveling, but even like being on the computer, being a car commuting, that you'll find maybe, okay, my one side always is really tighter or like there, and you'll start to kind of connect the dots, so that the next time you come across that challenge, that you'll already preemptively be like, okay, I remember, like I need to spend a little bit more time in zeroing on that time. So you basically stop an injury from starting, because that's why I say, when people are like, well, how do I know my body? It's like from doing these exercises, you're going to be able to check in what's happening from side to side. What are your little patterns, and how you can stop it from, like I say, becoming that unraveling thread. Yeah, and then the second part is stretching. And I really want to get into this, because you want to think like kind of stretching in layers. And a lot of people, the one thing that they'll miss is actually like the nerves. And I don't want to say stretching nerves, because you don't really stretch nerves, you actually just glide nerves. But you want to do things in layers. And oftentimes it's the limitation of our nerves that is actually limiting our flexibility and our range of motion. So that's why when I take people through like the stretching program, we'll do a nerve glide first. And so people may know, like most people's hamstrings are really, really tight, but the actual problem is there's a nerve that basically comes from where your kind of your spine meets your hips and goes down your leg. That nerve is called your sciatic nerve. And sometimes it will lead to like literally pain into your butt, like numbness into your butt. Sometimes it'll go down to your knees, and sometimes it will go down into your feet. So that can get compressed actually at the spine or in through any of your glute muscles or your hamstring muscles. But if you're not freeing that nerve and you're just going into an aggressive hamstring stretch, you're actually irritating your nerve, and it actually kind of keeps you in a protective state where everything's bound up. So that's why it's important to kind of go through these layers. Same thing for the upper body, where we do kind of some nerve glides for
This is one I do regularly.
So that whenever you get sometimes numbness and tingling, and Yep, she's got it. Tingling in the hands. And that could come from poor posture because the nerves come out of our neck. So being kind of at your computer all day, driving here, it will compress this nerve. Well, if you go and you're just trying to do like common door jam stretch, or you're trying to do all these stretches, but you're not gliding the nerve, again, it kind of throws you back. That's why you have to kind of come in layers. But with the stretching, like I said, with each one of those things, it's very targeted. So you want to target a specific muscle. And that's where sometimes, I love yoga, but that's where sometimes there's a little bit of a gap because you're just doing all these transitional movements. You're going through the flow, which is great and beautiful. And I love mobility exercises, but at the same time, you're not really taking the time, and I'm a stickler for form, and it makes a huge difference where you're really kind of, like I say, like reining it in and locking down that muscle. So you're actually targeting a specific muscle. And that's where too, you'll start to see the differences from side to side. You'll start to pick up on, okay, well, why am I tight on my right hip flexor, but my left hamstring is tight? Like what's going on there? And it starts to tell a story. And as you put focus into getting that balance, and as you start to see there's a balance coming back to your body, you're going to start to see it translated into your, how you put on a bra, how you bend down to tie your shoes, how you get the vacuum out of, like all those things you'll start to see. Yeah, exactly. A greater just ease, and people almost kind of get surprised. They're like, oh, whoa, I don't have pain with that. Like, whoa, that was super easy. And it starts to kind of show up. And then the final step of everything is stabilize. So what can happen? You want to, again, release your straight jacket, your tight muscles. Then you want to develop that new range of motion because now the muscles are free and are moving easier. So now you can actually get the mobility that you need. And now that you have that freedom to move, one of the most important things is you need to now stabilize and retrain, because you want to think, if your body's only been used to moving from here to here, but now you can move from here to here, well, you don't know how to be strong from the latter half of it. And this is why sometimes people report like instability or actually to be in pain when they're actually more mobile, because they haven't, like I said, like locked the joint in place. They haven't retrained your body. Well, no, this is how you move, that you have this new range of motion. And that's where, again, sometimes the gap is when people are just doing only flexibility pieces and they're not incorporating the stabilizing exercises. And the stabilizing exercises too, like I said, they target specific muscles, and they target kind of the muscles that help balance the body into there, but they're very focused on that specific muscle instead of, again, these big gross movements that oftentimes you'll see when you go into just an exercise class, where they're not really honing in on a specific targeted muscle or a movement. So kind of a lot gets kind of lost in it. And I guess you would say like the purity and the precision of the movement, which is very, very important. And again, it's another opportunity for you to become more in tune with your body and see how does that translate to getting up off the floor, getting out of the chair, getting out of my car. You'll start to see that difference.
Let alone lifting a dumbbell or
100%,
performing an activity with that particular joint that you've just stretched that now is unstable because it dodoesn't know exactly how much space it has to do the thing. And the stabilizers they're trying to figure out what do we do now?
Yeah. And a lot of kind of the intrinsic stabilizers aren't necessarily really big muscles. And they kind of, I say again, they get kind of drowned out by the bigger muscles. So like your big pec muscles, your quads that are on the front of your thighs, and some of those bigger muscles. So they're smaller, and the other ones tend to be so tight that a lot of these kind of intrinsic stabilizers get kind of dampened. So we need to kind of wake them up, and that's why you need to specifically train them. And you see a huge difference in the improvement of actually once your stabilizers are stronger. It will also reflect that you aren't as tight in some of those muscles that tend to be tighter. And I always kind of tell people like we kind of have three cores, and this is kind of, I'll throw this little nugget in there real quick, but you have your kind of primary core of like your front of your body. And
your
then
abs.
And your abs. Yeah. So your abs, and you have several layers went through there. And then I tell people, then you get two other cores. Is you have the core of your shoulder, which is your rotator cuff. So you want to think those are your stabilizers there, and that helps you so you can actually lift your arms overhead and do reaching stuff. And they tend to get when we're in bad posture and through there, they'll tend to get inflamed or impinged, and they lead to the dreaded rotator cuff surgery, which is a whole different story. And then your secondary core for kind of your hips are some of like your glute muscles, and they help stabilize the joint, because with both your arms and your hips, we can have all this motion. So it's a lot of room for unfortunate error and compensation. So if you're not strong in the core of your shoulder and kind of how those limbs connect into your main torso, that's where we get a lot of the issues elsewhere in our body. And you oftentimes from like, even people are like, well, how does this relate to my knee? Well, think of your knee. Your knee is basically trapped between your hips and your feet. So if there's any sort of issue or weakness in your hips or how you're meeting your ground, your knee is in the middle of it, and it often bears the brunt. So, and then also too, what you tend to see is when there's this imbalance of being too tight, like when your hip flexors, which are right in front of your hips, when those are too tight, it could, yeah, I know most people are when we sit all the time, that they kind of can arch the spine forward like that. So it's basically stretching your abdominals. So you're never going to be able to strengthen your abdominals if they're constantly stretched. And same thing too, it's like your glutes won't be able to fire. So your butt muscles aren't going to be able to fire. So people that are struggling, like, why do I still have this pooch in my stomach? Or why is my butt so flat? It's like, and maybe actually because you're so tight that you actually don't have that mobility where you can actually put these muscles in a place where they can actually do their job. So there's a lot of perks. So you look great and feel great.
Right, ladies. I know I don't have this problem because I'm still athletic, but I would have this problem if I didn't attend to it, which is a lot of women get into their 40s and that all of a sudden they're like, why is my butt so flat? Like, what happened to my nice round booty that I had when I was in my 20s or 30s? And part of that could be physiological if you're not using the muscle, but part of that is that affectionately it's called like a dumb butt. Right, your muscles turn off, which is exactly what Dr. Yvonne is saying. They turn off because the ones in the front, from sitting so much and from not having as active a lifestyle as we could, or from being not worked properly. So we get to have smart butts, ladies.
Yes, smart butts, exactly.
All of us.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're like, okay, our glutes are it's the biggest muscle of your body, and it's amazing to me. Like you said, dumb butt. I call it like sleepy butt syndrome, but it's just like you can't get it to fire, and people are like, oh my gosh, and out there like, I cannot get my butt to fire, and I'm like, it's okay. Like we'll make sure that we get that. And a lot of it, so how you do that, basically, a lot of it is getting that mobility back in the hips, releasing the hip flexors, and then there's certain exercises that really narrow in to get the butt to fire. But it is an amazing journey because people are like, oh my gosh, I can't get my butt to fire. And I'm like, yeah.
And just so everyone knows, like that can happen from somebody who's sedentary, but it can also happen for incredibly athletic women too. Like I've been performing for 23 years, and in this, I had a period of time where my butt stopped working. Like I just couldn't activate, or it got stuck. One side got kind of stuck on in spasm. So attention to the activation part, what she's saying is from the beginner to the advanced. It's always part of the picture. Doesn't matter if you've been a triathlete for the last 30 years or if you've been a casual, just all you do is walk. And like it applies everywhere. So this information is valuable for every single person.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's such a funny thing because I think so many people, active women, don't consider themselves like, I'm not athletic, I'm not an athlete. And when they tell me what they do, and I'm like, yes, you are. So it's an interesting thing how some people will think that what they do isn't active enough, or that they're not athletic. And I was just like, yes, you are. And even, so it's like all movement is good movement. So celebrate the fact that you are getting out there and being active. And you want to do everything you can to keep it that, because like everybody says, if you don't use it, you lose it. And especially as we start to get older, it gets hard. It gets harder to make gains, and you can lose it so quickly. And that's a really, 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 really important take home point too, where it's keeping that consistency, because that's the big thing. Because if you get to the point where you get injured and you have to take time off, whatever that looks like, it's like it takes so much longer for you to get back. which sometimes can be really tough, emotionally and physically. But still always know that there's hope that you can do it.
Right. And at the same time, once you start building step by step, once you get to a level that you're happy with and you feel strong, to maintain, it's not hours and hours a day.
Yeah.
The maintenance
Exactly.
of muscle, like muscle likes to be active and it likes to work. So it likes to hang, it likes to stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not like you're looking at, okay, if you start working out, you have to work out for an hour and a half for the rest of your life. That's not at all what's being
And
said.
that's a question I get a lot too when people, they come in and I work with them, is they'll ask, like, they get really like, will I just go back to the way I was before? And I was like, you would have to make a conscious decision to go backwards. Like, it would be painful. Like, you're now so much more mobile and so much more strong that you've completely like changed and revolutionized, like how you're walking, how you're giving up. It's really hard to go backward. I was like, you would like literally have to make a conscious decision. Like, I'm just going to be sedentary and I'm not going to do anything. But I was like, your life is so much more valuable now. Like, I don't think you do it, but you would have to make a conscious effort to go backwards. So I think that was a really good point that you brought up, that a lot of people have this fear, like, oh my gosh, to sustain this or to do this, it has to be, you know, so painful. And I mean, I think that comes into the other thing for exercise and the sustainability. I think do something that you love, like do something that you love, and it becomes a part of your life. And that's where I stand too, in regards to health and to fitness and everything, in regards to nutrition to being active. It has to be sustainable, or else that you come into like this and it's just not actually incorporated or part of your life and a part of your identity and who you are, and you don't love it. And that's where we start to see the breakdown. So I think that's another big one.
Right. Now we talked briefly about your SMART principles. Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the 5 SMART principles that I have is like, basically it's almost like a little checklist that you can kind of run through to kind of take a look back on how you're being active. And it's like how you can smartly keep active and keep exercising without getting injuries. So the 5 SMART principles. So S stands for season of life. So the season of life that you're in, that you're taking a moment and be like, well, where am I at? Are you going through a pregnancy? Are you coming off of a pregnancy? Are you working from home? That's a season of life. Are you traveling a lot? What season of life are you in? Did you perhaps have an illness? Are you a caretaker from that? And that goes back to what I was saying, is people put themselves in boxes that they're doing the same thing all 12 months of the year, but it may look very different to them. And even for where we're at with COVID, it's like a lot of people are trying to do the old things that they're doing, or they haven't adapted to where they're at right now, where yes, I am sitting a lot more. I can't go to the gym. I'm kind of trying to piecemeal this thing together, and they're not doing the things to balance their day. So when I say season of life that you're in, and one thing that comes to me a lot is like a lot of people that tend to travel. So traveling around the world, constantly getting into planes, or, you know, commuting a lot. It's like they only have a small window of time to do something, but they're not doing the things to balance out how sedentary they actually are. So they're going between 2 extremes instead of being like, okay, I need to kind of ease into where I'm active, and I just can't come home and just, you know, ride the bike for, you know, 30 miles when I've been sitting all the time. It's like, okay, well, maybe I need to balance it with some other things. And I think the season of life as well is where, also too, people just, it's like they stay, a lot of people will stay in like their same program like their entire life, and it won't adapt and it won't evolve with them, especially too, season of life, hormonal changes.
Perimenopause.
It's like, what season of life are you in? Is doing, you know, that kind of boot camp type of thing, is that serving you? Are box jumps serving you right now? It's like, you're like, whenever I look at an exercise program, I'm like, what is the purpose? I should be able to pick it up and be like, okay, this is what this is trying to accomplish. Like, oh, it looks like we're working on some mobility here. Like, I should literally be able to pick out if someone has some sort of injury, if there's some sort of imbalance, or if there's some sort of purpose and target through it. And that's how I think how you should approach your exercise. Okay, well, what is it? What do I want to gain from this? What am I getting from this? But yeah, honoring your season of life. And then the M is the method of mobility, or the method of movement. So balancing out, like if you're a runner or if you're a cyclist or if you like to dance or if you like to do Pilates or yoga, make sure that you're not just doing one thing, but there's variety in all the things that you're doing. That goes between if you're doing high impact stuff or lower impact stuff, but then also taking into account your method of movement and your body. So I'll give you a couple examples. So like running all the time, people, I mean, that's an impact activity and it tends to make the front of your hips tight. Sometimes you'll be rounded forward more. So you need to make sure that you're doing things to strengthen your backside and make sure that you open up. And it's a lot of people, what I hear a lot of times, especially with my runners, they're like, oh, I'm super strong because I run. Like that's just what they do. And they count that as their quote unquote strengthening as well. It's just like, yeah, you have to be strong. That's endurance. And I take them through doing like a single leg squat. So they're standing on the leg and they squat in and their knee literally collapses in. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that, like I'm just like, that is not a strong leg. So you look at these people and that's can sometimes when you look at people and they've got all this muscle tone and all that, and you actually test them out or break things down, and they can be very weak and very imbalanced. And you're like, I'm like, how are you? And a lot of times people, I'm like, how are you even running on those legs? Like, how are you even hiking on those legs? Are these people that literally just like collapse down? And it's not an age thing and it's not a sex thing. Trust me, I've gotten some of my professional male athletes and I test them out and I was like, oh my gosh, like I have women that are, several decades and they are so strong. Yeah. So it's like, sometimes it can be deceiving sometimes from people's outward appearance to where they're at actually really sense physically strong or balanced in their body. So that's kind of where you want to think of like, okay, is my method of movement something that's balanced and is serving me right now? And the A is the age. So don't let age ever be a limiting factor. I simply say to people, it's like, it's your age, you acknowledge it, and that's just where it is. But you need to honor it in the sense of there are hormonal changes. There are going to be changes in regards to, like we said before, like putting on muscle mass, changes in like tendons and pliability and the collagen and all that. So that goes into like when people just jump into activity and they're not warming up, or they haven't been continually working on their flexibility, that's when you start to run into things like you start to get tears or you start to get breakdown. Like there's a loss of kind of water content in the discs between your spine. Same thing with like the cushions in between your knees. So things start to kind of get brittle sometimes. And if you aren't doing things to make sure that you're not keeping those lubricated, eating well diet, water, and then doing flexibility. Yeah, there we go. Things to keep things just moving, because when you actually move, it actually lubricates the joints. So like Tin Man of the Wizard of Oz, like that's kind of how you want to think of it. So it's good.
Say that again.
So like, yeah. So when you move, it actually lubricates your joints and it helps things move easier. So when you are stiff and you're sedentary, things will be more compressed. And that's like when you get up from a chair, it's like creak, creak, creak. Or when you go to jump up out of bed in the morning, you're like, oh, it's not so easy to move fluidly. So that's where actually, like a lot of people say, motion is lotion for your body. So that's why it's good. And then the R is restore and kind of recovery. And this is so important. A lot of times people will do the activity piece, but they won't allow for the restoration of the body. And it goes back to where I say there's balance. There's, how you recover from activity is probably the biggest indicator of your health and your resilience. So I'll say it again. Your ability to recover from activity and also inactivity, and I'll get into that, is the biggest indicator of your health and your resilience. And I go into this a little bit more in the freebie that we'll speak about. But so when you are active, you should always be able, like I say, to get back down to your happy baseline within a couple hours. You should not be overly achy and overly sore. You should be able to recover within a day and a half. If you're not able to comfortably sleep through the night after you've been active, or if you've been super sedentary mode, you need to change that up. You're pushing yourself too much. And that's the problem. A lot of times people just push. Okay, I pushed a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to push it again. I'm going to up my exercise routine, or I'll add something in. And it, like, again, your days of your weeks may change in what you're able to do and again, that balance of being sedentary and being overly active. I think sometimes that mismatch, or where people are just sitting, but I only have a window of time and I'm going to jump up and go be active. I've seen more injuries happen from that than anything else, versus like being like, okay, I'm going to ease into this. Like I need to kind of, spend more time stretching and releasing things. And then I'll take, even if it's less time where I'm running or doing some of the strength piece, it's a better way to go, because so many people, countless stories. I ran up the stairs and I heard a pop. Like I just only had 20 minutes of time and I jumped on the elliptical and I knew I was super tight. Or I went for one more thing and I knew it. And it was just like, I was just like, yeah, it's just why it's very important. So the restoration piece is really important. And into the restoration piece comes and falls in the S3 principle. So the idea of the soft tissue release and the stretching and the focusing, stabilizing exercises. And the T is time. So that's a big important thing. A lot of people, and it is kind of out there, it's like that you have to exercise. You said it so beautifully, like hours and hours, like that there's absolutely no gains or benefits from, like I literally say with my principles, like you can sprinkle them throughout your day. Like there's still value of getting up from your desk for 90 minutes and doing that one stretch, doing it. Like I literally tell people, I'm like, these are your brushing your teeth exercises. Like there's exercises you can do when you're brushing your teeth, or you're waiting for something to heat up in the microwave, or you're waiting for the coffee to drip. Like the dog thinks I'm
counter push-ups.
Yeah, actually counter push-ups, like sprinkle throughout your day. And like I said, it goes back to the more that it's integrated and into your life, like your body almost kind of like gravitates towards doing it, and you don't even think about it anymore. It's kind of like, oh, that feels good. And it's like, you don't have to necessarily carve out a block of time, and then it's like an all or nothing thing. I think that's a big thing too, that people think, well, if I didn't do all the exercises, I failed. And I was like, that's not true. Like you celebrate what you can do and build off of that. And you will start to see the value of the results of being it. And it will kind of further propel you to be like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. I can keep doing it. But there's still value in kind of, like I said, doing part of it, sprinkling it throughout your day. You don't have to just set aside. People are like, oh, I have to carve out 30 minutes. Well, I can't do it. It's just like, just sprinkle it throughout your day. And you'd be surprised, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. It all adds up to just being able to keep active and keeping and avoiding injuries, and definitely avoiding surgeries, because we all don't want to be there. So that's kind of the 5 SMART principles, and you'll see how they're very interwoven with also the 3S mobility method.
Right. 3S mobility method: soften, stretch, and stabilize.
You got it. Yeah. So those are the 3. Yeah. And it does a trick. Like people all the time, they're just like, oh my gosh, it's like so easy to do. And they're like, they expect like things have to be so complicated or so painful. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't. But they're just, it's amazing. I have one woman who's been doing the program for a really long time. So, and she's just like, oh my gosh, it's like, I do my things every day and it makes such a big difference. Like I'm noticing it at the gym. She's like, even people are coming up to me and telling me my butt looks better. I was like, oh, that's a good perk too. I was just like, okay. I was like, you're so sweet. I love it. But yeah, and I like all people that I've helped years and years ago, they're like, I'm still doing it. And these are people that have come from like rotator cuff injuries or surgeries and stuff. And they're like, I'm still doing like I always say, like, it's your meat and potato programs. Like I literally, because that's the thing is like people, if you confuse them or if you give them too much, they're not going to stick with that. I figured that out a long time ago. And I'm like, I'm a bottom line type of a girl. Like, what is the most effective thing that you can do that gets to the point, gets the results, and is not confusing? Because if there's confusion, it's not fun. And if it doesn't work, you're not going to stick with it. It's that simple. So that's why I kind of developed the program, because I live in a real world and I help out real people and I solve real problems. And so that's the solution of it.
It's interesting because Yvonne and I haven't talked about this, but there are my meat and potatoes type of exercises that I know if I don't do these stabilizing exercise, which is my rotator cuff, my glute medius, and my core, if I don't do these 3 things, when those things aren't done, like the other activities I do aren't as powerful. And if I don't do them, that's when I start getting back pain. And it's like, oh, if my back's aching, I'll be like, wait, oh, whoops. So it's funny because she and I haven't had this conversation until this moment. And I do those things to keep myself waking up pain-free at
Mhm.
47, having performed for the last
Yes.
23 years, and
Yep.
also an Olympic athlete before that. So ladies, no matter where you are, it's not too late. You can start
Yeah.
with the baby steps.
Mhm.
And so I'm really excited about this, is that Yvonne is
Oh, yeah.
offering this group of women, there's probably some men in here, a private masterclass as part of a free bonus. And we'll have that date secured. So we'll be able to say that, not time for this interview, but
Yeah.
with the link.
Yeah.
And she's going to offer us a private masterclass, because if anyone's feeling overwhelmed with the amount of awesome information that has just come in, it is accessible to everyone, and it is understandable in the three with S3 mobility method.
Mhm.
Yes. And so I'm super excited that Dr. Yvonne is offering this to us, and thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So yeah, so I put together a blueprint of kind of like it, and it even dives in a little bit deeper, but it's a pain-free body blueprint, and you can get it at painfreebodyblueprint.com. And then when you download it, it'll also invite you to the Rapid Relief Club, which is a free Facebook group. So you can be surrounded by awesome people just like yourself. And I go in and I do weekly Q&As. I do some fun mobility classes and Pilates classes in there, some movement classes. I'm there to answer your questions, and I'm there to support you, because at the end of the day, I'm on a mission to help serve over 1 million women so that they can be pain-free and off of pills, out of the OR. Like I said, I've spent a career in there, and I want to make sure that nobody has to go down that route. Life is too beautiful and too short not to live it to its fullest. You do not have to settle. So get in and up to that group, and then we'll kind of nail down that masterclass for you. We'll go through this resource, because in this resource, I map out these like golden nuggets of the S3 mobility method, the SMART principles, and then some other my 4 cornerstone framework. And I also tossed in some of my best videos in through there. So it actually will go through the mobility method in there, and I'll kind of put in some of those kind of key kind of foundational exercises for you guys to get started with. But then also a lot of people will get these freebies and they won't use them, but it's so darn good, and I want to go through with it. And then I want you guys to come back to me and just kind of pepper me with any questions that you have, so I can just make sure that you guys have your questions answered, that you feel super supported, and that you can just kind of glean all you can from this resource. And yeah, I want to be there and be able to support you guys, so you can live your pain-free and like most fulfilling life possible.
Thank you, Dr. Yvonne. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, we'll let you go, and look for those resources, ladies. Get in.